Surprise, everybody! Maybe it's not a surprise to you because you saw the lesson title, but I decided that it's kind of silly to talk about arrays if we haven't yet talked about variables. So I'm going to switch this up a bit, and we'll get right on with variables, and then we'll talk about arrays in the next video. Let's go in here and create a new file, and I will do my opening and close tags and save that. And we got variables here, so I'll just call this vars.php. You'll see a lot of people abbreviate variable with var. It's the same thing. Actually, there's a keyword, var, but we won't get into that until we start talking about object-oriented stuff. So let's get into this variables. Well, what is a variable? We have to sort of define what we're talking about here. Now, a variable is just a named bit of data. You know that stuff in your computer called RAM, random access memory? That's where all of the program's data is stored. So using variables is how we interface with the physical hardware to store our program's data. Now that may seem complicated, but the way we use this concept is extremely simple. Okay, now we're going to get into the syntax for using PHP's variables. So the first thing I need to mention is a $sign. Every variable name starts with a $sign. That's pretty easy to remember. It also makes variables easy to spot when you're looking through code because they're the only things that start with a $sign. So we have this $sign, and then the first character of a variable after the $sign can be any letter, so that's A through Z. It can be any uppercase letter, like that, or it can be an underscore. So I'm going to type M, because my variable name is going to start with M. After you have your first character, then you can have any letter, just like before, A through Z, or uppercase letter, or underscore, just like before, or any digit. So just remember that digits can't be the first character of a variable name. So I'm going to type my variable. Now, the rules I just gave you for a variable name, meaning that it can only have letters and numbers and underscores, except for the first character, those are rules. You can't break them. But you see the way I typed my variable, I used lowercase my and then I did an uppercase variable. That's a convention. Conventions are just rules that a lot of people follow, but they're not required. So a lot of people use this particular convention to name things, and that convention is just to uppercase the second word and every additional word after the first. So if I were to continue naming this variable, I could do is awesome. So my variable is awesome. That would be a legal variable name. So there isn't really a limit to how long these can be, but just remember there's no spaces, there's no special characters, just numbers, letters, and underscores. So this is my variable name, starting with a $sign. And then I'm going to type an equal sign. Now this equal sign in PHP is the assignment operator. The assignment operator just says that whatever's on the left gets the value on the right. So let's say my variable equals this is my variable. Not very exciting, but there you have it. So this is a string. We learned about strings in the last video. And so we're just saying my variable is assign the value of whatever this string is. And then a semicolon, of course. So remember, left-hand side gets the value of right-hand side. It's never any other way. It is not possible to say this is my variable equals my variable. That will cause an error because this is my it doesn't make any sense to say this gets the value of some variable because this is just a constant string, right? So let's continue. Let's run this in the browser. And we refresh, you'll see it's still blank. It's still blank because we haven't used an echo statement. We haven't told it to print anything out to the screen. So how do we do that? We can use an echo statement right below the variable and say my variable, and Sublime will finish that off for us. And now we're saying echo my variable. But this is not in quotes, right? It's not in quotes, so it's not a string, it's not a number, and because it's prefixed with a $sign, PHP knows that it's a variable. And so it goes and it finds out the value of that variable. It looks up the value and it says, oh, that's the value. and it basically substitutes the value right there. So if we refresh again, we get that sentence. This is my variable. Okay, so notice that the echo statement is after my variable is defined. So let's put that up. Actually, I can use a keyboard shortcut. I can do Control Shift and the up arrow a few times, and it will move that up and down. You see that? So let's put it above my variable. So let's save that and refresh and see what happens. See, we get this undefined variable. It's still a notice, and we have an undefined variable. And that's because when PHP gets to this statement, we have not yet defined what the variable is, and so it doesn't know what it is. Each line in a program is executed sequentially, except for when we get to flow control exceptions, but we don't have any of those yet. So if each line is executed sequentially, my variable doesn't exist until line 5 here. So that's why we have to put the echo below the definition of my variable. So this can also be a number, of course, and so we'll just make that a 5, and I'll show you that works. And so let's make a few more variables. I'll say his variable, and I'll give it a 10. So one thing we can do is our same arithmetic operations. So what's this going to do? It's going to say echo all of this, okay? And then all of this is something plus something else. And so the first something is going to be my variable, so it looks that up, it finds out it's a 5. And the second something is something called his variable, and it's that 10. So when you add them together, we're going to get a 15. I'm sure you didn't have to go through that rigorous process to figure out it was going to print out 15, but it's good to know exactly what's going on. When I see this echo statement, and followed by something, what exactly is it doing? Okay, so a couple more things I want to talk about before we wrap up. Let's change this back to a single variable here. And I'm going to change this to, we can leave it at 5, that's fine. And I want to echo not this thing, but I want to say a string my variable. Now, you probably know what this is going to print out. If I Alt-tab away, it's just going to print out that $ my variable because it's a literal string. So remember in the last video when I was talking about single quotes and double quotes, and I had something like that \n, or if you use double quotes, that'll actually turn into a new line. But if you use single quotes, it will just print out the \n. So we have something similar going on here. If I use double quotes and I say my variable, instead of printing out my variable, PHP will see this $, it will realize that, oh, this is a variable, not a string, and it will go grab the value of that. So let's save and come back, and we get a 5 instead of my variable. So that's the difference between double quotations and single quotations. And it's really useful, for example, if you have if you're writing HTML, if you're echoing out HTML. So let's see, we might have div class equals and then some class name, and so it'd go like this here, and maybe like div value, and then this would be div class. And so our variables might look something like div class equals big, I don't know, and then div value, this is the value of the div. Alright, so what's going on here? We've got two variables. One is called div class, the other one's called div value, and all that's happening is they're getting pushed right into this string here, which is in double quotes. And HTML says I'm allowed to use those single quotes for attribute names. And so this is going to end up being big, and then div value is going to end up being, this is the value of the div, right? So let's save that and come over here, and let's go into our source, And you'll see there we go. We got this div. This is the value of the div, and then the closing tag. So going back here, I just want to reiterate that quotation is part of this string. That is part of this string. And this div class here, that's just big. That is not the quotation big quotation. That is just big. So if you add that, which is part of this string here, it'll just print out the one quotation, and then it will print out big. So you can see that if you go here, there's just one quotation there. And so that's kind of important. The way PHP knows it's a string is because it's delimited, meaning that one's on either side, by these apostrophes, but the actual value of the string is just big. So that's about all we have for today. I just want to introduce one idea before we leave, and that is this idea that we like to keep our data and our presentation separate. And what do I mean by that? I mean that all of the data that drives our application should be kept separate from the presentation of that data. So for example, you can imagine in an HTML page that I have some, complicated and fancy HTML, and somewhere in that I've got important data, for example, a phone number for your business. And so that phone number, you could just embed it in the HTML, but it might be easier to make a variable for that phone number. And every time you need to use it, just drop it in as that variable. Now, whenever you update that phone number, it's going to update everywhere on the page when you won't have to worry about hunting down each individual one. And so that's one of the good things about keeping your data and your presentation separate. And we're going to hit on this a lot in the future, and it's going to be very important to think about doing that as early as possible, and you can start writing quality applications from the beginning. So I hope you enjoyed, and we'll talk to you about arrays in the next lesson. Bye.